gracias. Gracias a todos. But now I'm going to continue in English. And I want to address something that ties together a lot of the threats that we're seeing, that there are common features, an attack on the entire framework within which we act. So not just this policy and that, as important as they are, but the whole framework of liberal democracy. And this is a movement globally that is learning from each other. They are connected and often coordinated. And we have to be aware of what we are facing, not only in Latin America, but all around the planet. The very foundations of the system of liberal democracy, presumption of liberty, limited government, property, free exchange, and the rule of law, are being attacked by authoritarian populism. We're told individual rights must be sacrificed for national unity, that rules-based orders should be replaced with orders based on will and power, and further, that opposition is per se illegitimate. Speech is sedition, and of course, the consequence is the whole wealth of the nation is divided up among the cronies of the leaders of these movements. So let's turn to what is populism. It's a term that's sometimes used, bandied about. Does it mean just being popular? No, there's something deeper. Isaiah Berlin identified the key feature of populism, the idea that some group is victimized. They have been the victims of some other group. He says an elite, economic, political, racial, a secret or open enemy, as he says, capitalism, Jews, and all the rest of it. But whoever the enemy is, whether native, ethnic, social, does not matter. And this is the key. The enemy is chosen by the movement. So populism is not just rejection of elite rule. It is also, as Jan Werner Müller points out in his study, deeply anti-pluralistic. The populists say they and they alone represent the people. And we can specify the people as a tool, we specify the enemy as a tool to create the people. So the people is not what we normally think of as the population of a country. It is a political construct for the purpose of seizing power. One of the most clear advocates of this view, one of Argentina's least valuable exports to the world, Ernesto Laclau, put it very neatly in a badly written, turgid book called On Populist Reason. I read it so you don't have to. He's very clear. He says you create a frontier of exclusion to divide society into two camps. The people is something less than the totality of the members of the community, a partial component which nevertheless aspires to be conceived as the only legitimate totality, in opposition to the enemy. And as his wife, Chantal Mouffe, put it very neatly, when we determine who the enemy is, we build the sort of people we want to build. So you fashion the people by designating who the enemy will be. Inigo Errejón, one of the founders of Podemos in Spain, put it very neatly when he talked about the casta. He said its mobilizing power comes from its lack of definition. He says it's statistically undefinable, and this is its greatest performative capacity. It is whom we designate it to be. Now, when you then see it that way, the leader of these movements combines the authentic will of the true people. And the most insane speech I think I've ever listened to in my life, Hugo Chavez, when he said, Chavez is no longer me. You are all Chavez, farmer, peasant, soldier, etc., because Chavez is not me, Chavez is a people. And this is a pretty common theme we hear among these populist politicians, not only Latin America, but in North America, Europe, and elsewhere as well. But now there's a new twist. This is not the 1930s anymore, because you can be cool because of Bitcoin. That's right. So you can be the coolest dictator on the planet because Bitcoin. Now, he got a little pushback on calling himself that on his Twitter handle, So he changed it to philosopher king, only slightly better, but still a self-described tyrant and unashamed of this tyranny. Now, we can look back to our own tradition in liberalism to understand this. Hayek had lived through the similar experience, the 20s and the 30s. And he said, what do you see when people say, enough talk, no more discussion, action, or as an American politician put it, the hour of action has arrived? He says, that is when you know the dictatorship is being constructed, when deliberation and discourse is denigrated in favor of action. And the will of the leader, that is now the guide to all the short-term policies of the state that have often devastating long-term consequences. Immediate raises in statutory minimum wage, controls on prices, confiscations, redistributions in the name of fairness, but it all ends up in the hands, of course, of the cronies of the leaders of these movements. This also is deeply understood in the liberal tradition. Ludwig Mises pointed this out. One intervention, price controls to make sure that milk is affordable, leads to shortages, leads to allocation mechanisms, leads to confiscation, and there's a dynamic that leads you then, to a loss of freedom systematically. Now, what moves these movements? Well, hatred of the enemy, the illegitimate opposition. We need to resist that and not to fall into the trap of populism and hate them back. It's what they want. A great hero in our tradition, Liu Xiaobo, the second Nobel Prize winner to die in prison, in a Chinese Communist Party prison, put it very neatly. He said, reject enemy mentality. It hinders a nation's progress toward freedom and democracy. So we should not fall into the trap of hating them back. That is how they ultimately win. What is the most powerful antidote for their hatred? It is our love for the freedom of everybody. My hero, all of our Brazilian friends know this, I admire this man so much, Joaquim Nabuco, in his book on abolitionism, which had a big impact on eliminating slavery, his lifelong cause. We should love the freedom of other people. When we love the freedom of others, then we will begin to really appreciate our own. Now, warning, we need to be prepared. And the reason is, a global dictatorial alliance is coming to a country near you. And we're seeing this all around the planet. There is coordination, there is cooperation, there are money flows, and much more. And they're learning from each other and helping each other to attack the very foundations of liberal democracy. So what can defeat hatred? Well, our love for the dignity of everyone and a shameless advertisement. If you take a picture of this, you can download our book on dignity as the foundation for our movement at zero price. So there's the ideas of dignity and liberty. But then the question, who can defeat hatred with love? And the answer is, only we can do it. Thank you.